FNB says that it's complied with labour laws when dismissing 4 employees, and it says that it respects the constitutional right of its employees to privacy and freedom of association. This comes after news broke at the weekend that 4 young ANC supporters had been sacked for various comments on WhatsApp social groups and business emails. The Independent Online reported that they were fired for political talk and using insulting language. One conversation thread insulted DA leader Mmusi Maimane. An employee also reportedly wrote that working at FNB was like going into slavery, and he called FNB untransformed. In another email, a staffer said that, seemingly in reference to white people, that imperialists ruined our land and killed our forefathers. FNB has not confirmed the reason for their dismissals. It says that it followed a thorough and rigorous internal disciplinary process and CCMA process, which were concluded a year ago and which were confidential. Joining me now from our Pretoria studio is Labour Relations Attorney Tony Healy. Tony, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the programme. So the Kasatu Trade Union said that these guys were fired unfairly for exercising their constitutional right of free speech. Do you agree with them, or do you think the bank has a case?
Good evening, Peter. The cases of this nature, when you're talking about the exercising of constitutional rights, yes, we have very important rights enshrined in the Constitution, but one may not exercise those rights in an unfettered way to the extent that it impinges on the rights of others. So you can't, for example, hide behind a claim that you have a freedom of expression when that expression impinges the rights of others and is insulting and in its own way is undignified and inflammatory. So we have a section in our Constitution which speaks to this specifically and says that rights are important, they're definitely enshrined, but you need to be careful how you exercise them so you don't encroach on the rights of others.
All right, so help us walk through this particular one, because they didn't make these statements in public. They thought that they were communicating privately on company email and on a social WhatsApp group. So why such a tough stance when this wasn't a public conversation?
Well, my understanding is that FNB, as do many other organizations, Peter, had a policy against inflammatory language of this nature. And very few of these kinds of utterances are indeed private. If you have internal emails, for example, they are seen by numbers of employees, and even closed WhatsApp groups. Messages have the potential to be forwarded. And we were just dealing with, reviewing a case in the UK last week on this very subject, where employers need to be extremely careful and thorough in their policies regarding social media to ensure that employees don't slag off the employer, insult the employer, or make statements that are derogatory regarding the dignity of the employer in places even partially private, such as WhatsApp groups and internal emails. None of those statements are essentially private and held within those groupings alone.
So let's make the distinction between what if they had this conversation after hours on their own phones. Would it have made a difference? Is there something about the fact that they probably used company emails and company computers?
Well, even Peter, even the fact that it's off company premises and after hours does not especially let these employees off the hook. You know, we have off-duty misconduct in our law, and that talks to the fact that employees who act in a manner which in any way brings the good name of their employer into disrepute falls under the jurisdiction of the employer's disciplinary procedure. And any platform that has the potential for those utterances to be made public or be heard or read by those who could be influenced against the employer provides the employer with grounds to take action. FNB, as I indicated, will have had quite clear policies on this issue. And I think another point we need to remember is that any employee who has a particular gripe against their employer, and in this particular case it related to transformation, there are many, many legitimate avenues which you can adopt and follow to pursue those concerns, and to slag off your employer in social media is not one of them.
So are you saying that I can never send a message to my colleague Francis on a WhatsApp group that we've created and say, I'm really not happy at the SABC at the moment, I'm finding that our management is untransformed? Are you saying I can never have that conversation, even though it's a legitimate feeling?
Well, look, Peter, the fact of the matter is that those conversations occur between employees and colleagues every day, I think, around the country. The problem with putting it in writing is that it has the potential for Francis, for example, to copy and paste and forward that message to somebody else. And you have no control over that, and the employer has no control over that. So employers need to be especially careful when it comes to the kind of language that's used, especially if it's put in writing, and even if it's orally, that has the potential to be dispersed and bring the good name of that employer into disrepute.
All right, so let's take away the jibe against the bank itself, and then let's just talk about what he said about Musi Maimane and so on and so forth, and imperialism, etc., etc. This is national discourse. This is what we hear in Parliament. This is what we see in our newspapers. They're not saying anything profoundly new or something that we haven't heard. Does that still become problematic for them as bank employees? Because then that suggests you can never say anything that the public is saying.
Well, I think the problem here, Peter, is that you're quite right, that public discourse takes place daily. And takes place robustly daily. I think what the problem here is that it's occurring in the context of an employer that needs to be extremely careful when it comes to such highly charged subject matter. As you know, these were racially charged statements, they were politically charged statements, they were made in the context, within the environment of this particular employer. And it has to take steps to avoid this. Regardless of the fact that it was made by an individual, it was made by an individual in the context of them being an employer, using their employer communication platforms and sharing that information with other employees. And that's the dilemma. You make a good point that it's social discourse which takes place daily, but this takes place in the context of a workplace, and that's problematic.
All right, very finally, we've run out of time, but is it okay for employers to be monitoring our emails at work? It seems like an invasion of privacy to me.
Yeah, typically what happens, Peter, is employers have electronic media platform policies which confirm that they are entitled to monitor business-related platforms like email. And that normally forms part of the policy environment within an organization. And they do that. They necessarily need to protect themselves against the kind of abuse that's happened in this particular case.
All right, Tony Healy, we're going to have to leave it there, but I'm sure that this will be a topic of conversation for at least another day. Thanks very much indeed.